Roman legions were always considered an invincible machine, capable of crushing any army and conquering any people. Their discipline, steel armor, and the tactical genius of their commanders struck fear into the hearts of the entire known world, from the misty shores of Britain to the hot sands of Africa. But history knows a moment when this great power encountered something that did not fit into the usual framework of Roman military science. It was a catastrophe born not of the weakness of soldiers, but of the excessive pride of one man whose name was synonymous with wealth. Marcus Crassus dreamed of the glory of Alexander the Great, but found only shame and death in the endless wastelands of the East. His gold, which could have bought entire cities, proved useless against the thousands of arrows that blocked out the sun. Watch the video to the end to find out the terrible price the empire paid for underestimating the barbarians and how the desert sand became the grave of the cream of the Roman army. What if I told you that everything you believed in was a lie? It is commonly believed that wars are waged to defend borders or seize necessary resources, but Crassus's campaign was quite different. It was a war waged by one man against common sense, dictated solely by personal envy and wounded pride. Marcus Crassus was the richest man in Rome, his fortune so vast that he could maintain a private army at his own expense. But in Rome, respect was earned not with gold, but with triumphs and victories on the battlefield, which Crassus lacked. He looked with envy at the successes of his partners in the triumvirate, Pompey the Great and Julius Caesar, whose fame resounded throughout the Forum. He was already over 60, an age when Roman patricians usually enjoyed peace and power in the Senate. But Crassus felt that history would remember him only as a money bag, not as a great commander. He needed his own small, victorious war that would put him on a par with the greatest strategists of the era. The Parthian Empire, rich and seemingly weak, seemed to him the ideal target for an easy conquest. He dreamed of the laurels of victory, of crowds chanting his name, and of the treasures of the East that would replenish his already bottomless treasury. The Senate and the people of Rome were categorically opposed to this war, seeing no benefit for the state in it. The tribunes of the people even cursed Crassus as he left the city, calling down the wrath of the gods upon the head of the greedy commander. But the clink of gold drowned out the voices of reason, and Crassus was confident that the luck that had accompanied him in business would not abandon him in battle. He assembled an impressive army, 7 legions, well-equipped and ready for campaigning. These were experienced soldiers confident in their superiority over any enemy they might encounter. The crossing of the Euphrates was successful, and the first easy victories over small garrisons only strengthened Crassus's belief in success. He did not listen to his advisors, who suggested that he establish a foothold in the cities and study the enemy. He was drawn to the depths of enemy territory. In his imagination, Parthia was already at his feet, ready to surrender at the sight of the Roman eagles. He did not understand that the East was not Gaul or Spain. Here, completely different laws of war applied. Crassus behaved not like a general, but like a banker who had come to collect a debt that no one had given him. He spent his time counting the spoils captured in temples instead of conducting reconnaissance and preparing his troops. This administrative fuss gave the Parthians precious time to gather their forces and prepare to meet their uninvited guest. Every delay, every day spent inventorying the loot, brought disaster closer. An atmosphere of complacency reigned in Crassus' headquarters, with officers discussing how they would divide the skins of the Parthian bears that had not been killed. No one took the stories about the Parthian horsemen seriously, considering them cowardly raiders incapable of withstanding a direct attack by the legion. The Romans were accustomed to the enemy always engaging in face-to-face combat, where heavy infantry had an undeniable advantage. Ignoring the characteristics of the enemy was the first and perhaps the main mistake of this campaign. Crassus's self-confidence spread to his soldiers, who went to war as if it were a walk in the park. They dreamed of gold, silk, and spices that they would bring home to their families. No one thought that these endless expanses could become a trap from which there was no escape. They believed in their commander not as a strategist, but as a talisman who would bring them wealth. This war was doomed from the start because it was based not on national necessity, but on personal greed. Crassus wanted to buy himself a place in history, but the price turned out to be too high even for him. He risked the lives of 40,000 Roman citizens to satisfy his own ambitions. And when the first alarming news began to arrive from scouts, it was already too late to change anything. I am very interested to hear your point of view. What do you think about leaders who start wars for personal glory? Write about it in the comments. Are you ready to learn the truth about the betrayal that changed everything? When the Roman army advanced deep into the east, Crassus was faced with a choice of route that would determine the fate of the expedition. The Armenian king Artavasdes, an ally of Rome, came to him and proposed a sensible and safe plan of attack. He advised going through mountainous Armenia, where the terrain would deprive the Parthian cavalry of its main advantage: maneuverability. In the mountains, the Roman infantry would feel confident, having constant access to water and food. Artavasdes promised not only safe passage, but also reinforcements in the form of his own heavy cavalry, which could cover the Roman flanks. It was a strategically sound route that would allow a strike at the heart of Parthia while minimizing risks. It seemed that the very logic of war dictated accepting this proposal and ensuring the safety of the army. But Crassus, blinded by his desire for a quick victory, rejected this plan, considering it too long and circuitous. Instead of a loyal ally, he trusted a man named Abgar, or Ariaman, a local chieftain who was secretly working for the Parthians. This man, who played the role of the evil genius of the Roman army, convinced Crassus that the Parthians were evacuating their treasures in panic and that they needed to hurry to intercept them. He painted a picture of easy prey and a fleeing enemy, playing on the greed of the Roman commander. Abgar assured him that the route through the desert would be short and would lead straight to the enemy's unprotected cities. And Crassus believed the traitor, ordering his army to turn away from the Euphrates River and into the sun-scorched Mesopotamian plain. This decision was the point of no return, the moment when the fate of the legions was finally sealed. The army left the fertile banks and stepped into a world where the only masters were wind, sand, and scorching heat. Soldiers accustomed to long marches encountered for the first time an enemy that could not be pierced with a sword: nature itself. The landscape around me changed with frightening speed. The grass disappeared, giving way to endless sand dunes and rocky wastelands. The horizon shimmered with heat, creating mirages that deceived weary travelers, promising water that did not exist. Every step was difficult, my feet sinking into the hot sand, my heavy armor turning into a red-hot oven. Dust clogged my nose, ears, and eyes, creaking between my teeth and making breathing a torment. Abgar, leading the Romans deeper and deeper into the trap, constantly hurried them along, giving them no time for proper rest. He mocked the slowness of the legions, asking if they thought they were marching through Campania. Meanwhile, his spies reported every movement of the Roman column to the Parthian commander Surena. The Romans were walking blindfolded straight into a trap ready to snap shut. Water was becoming scarce, supplies were dwindling, and the wells they encountered along the way were either dry or poisoned. Discipline began to falter, and rumors of the guide's betrayal spread among the soldiers. But Crassus remained deaf to the grumbling. He saw only the goal imposed on him by a cunning enemy and drove his men forward. Even the officers began to doubt the adequacy of their leader, but Roman loyalty to their oath kept them in line. Finally, when the army was exhausted from the march and cut off from its supply bases, Abgar disappeared, as if he had vanished into thin air. The Romans were left alone in the middle of a hostile desert, without a guide, and without any idea of where the enemy was. A sense of impending doom hung heavy and stifling in the scorching air. It was at this moment that the scouts brought the news that everyone had feared and awaited at the same time. Ahead, beyond the veil of dust, they saw not a fleeing crowd with carts, but an organized army ready for battle. Illusions crumbled, giving way to harsh reality. They were being waited for, and waited for on the enemy's terms. Why do you think experienced people so often trust those who promise them quick and easy success?
Arm yourselves.
I will reveal the most closely guarded secret of the Parthian army, which many historians either mention in passing or ignore altogether. preoccupied with describing the battle itself. But the victory at Carrhae was forged not only by the valor of the warriors and the elegance of Parthian tactics, it was created by a brilliant, almost industrial system of combat supply that had no analogues in the ancient world. Shurin, the commander-in-chief of the Parthians, understood that the standard number of arrows that a horseman carries in his quiver would only be enough for a short raid, but not for the destruction of a Roman legion protected by iron, discipline, and formation. The usual step tactic of hit and retreat would not work against an army capable of withstanding even greater onslaughts. That is why Sirena turned his army into a conveyor belt of death, in which every element, from the armorer to the camel, worked toward a single goal: to ensure continuous fire. He assembled a huge convoy consisting of thousands of camels, each carrying bales stuffed to the brim with arrows. A veritable mobile ammunition depot. This huge traveling arsenal accompanied the army, moving parallel to the battle lines but staying far enough away that no Roman detachment could reach it. No army in antiquity had ever approached logistics so coolly, so scientifically, so close to what we would today call the military industry. A key part of Parthians' superiority was their weaponry. A complex bow made of wood glued together with layers of horn and tendons. It was the product of a long tradition of steppe craftsmen, a masterpiece of engineering that required months of work and rare materials. The tension of such a bow was so powerful that the arrow not only flew farther and faster, but also pierced Roman shields and even chainmail, rendering the protection familiar to the Romans almost useless. For legionnaires accustomed to hand-to-hand combat and close formation, such long-range superiority was a painful discovery. But the main weapon was the people themselves. Parthian horsemen learned to stay in the saddle before they could walk confidently, and the horse was an extension of their own body. Surin's army consisted of two main types: light cavalry archers and heavy cavalry, cataphracts. The light cavalry acted like a swarm of bees, constantly showering the enemy with deadly stings, not allowing them to approach and not engaging in hand-to-hand combat. They shot while standing in the saddle, sitting, lying on the side of the horse, shooting sideways and backwards. Hence the legendary Parthian shot, when the rider retreating turned his body and released an arrow backwards with such accuracy and force that the Romans fell for this trick again and again. Cataphracts were the prototype of medieval knights. The rider and horse were completely encased in armor that glistened in the sun and was so heavy that an untrained person could not take a single step in it. They resembled living iron statues, and their task was to deliver a powerful blow with their spears to the Roman ranks, already weakened by endless fire from light cavalry. The sight of the approaching heavy cavalry struck fear even into the seasoned legionaries. The iron rumble, clouds of dust, and glint of armor broke the enemy's morale in advance. Shurin's tactics were completely different from what the Romans were used to. He avoided direct wall-to-wall clashes, which were the legionnaires' forte. Instead, he waged a fluid, flexible, mobile war, like flowing water. Where the Romans advanced, the Parthians retreated, drawing them into the desert. Where the legion opened up, they struck. They did not allow the Romans to close the distance, depriving their swords of the opportunity to speak. It was a war of attrition, a slow and merciless process in which every arrow shot from a Parthian bow brought the Roman army closer to defeat. Despite his youth, he was about 30 years old. Sirena showed such wisdom that even Plutarch called him one of the most outstanding commanders of the East. He had an excellent understanding of the psychology of the Romans, studied their war machine in detail, and prepared an antidote for every maneuver. He did not just assemble an army, he created a unified, interconnected system where every horseman knew exactly what to do, when to retreat, when to shoot, and when to rush forward. It was at Carrhae that for the first time in history, ammunition played a decisive role not in preparation for battle, but directly in the course of it. When the archers ran out of arrows, they did not leave the field or withdraw from the battle. They rode back to their camels, replenished their quivers, and returned to continue firing. It was an endless, cyclical stream of death that took the Romans completely by surprise. They kept waiting for the moment when the barbarians would fire their last shot, and then they could finally attack and crush them in close combat. But that moment never came. The arrows never ran out. Under the scorching desert sun, the Romans melted physically and morally. realizing that their advantage was useless and that their swords had never found their target. The Parthians' technological, organizational, and tactical superiority proved absolute, and it was this that decided the outcome of the famous battle. Are you ready for the shocking truth? The meeting of the two armies did not happen as described in Roman textbooks on tactics. When scouts returned with reports of the enemy's approach, Crassus first tried to line up his troops in a wide line to prevent them from being surrounded. But realizing that the enemy was everywhere, he rearranged the legions into a huge hollow square, a giant quadrangle inside which the baggage train and command were sheltered. Each side of this living fort consisted of 12 cohorts ready to repel an attack from any direction. The Parthians appeared on the horizon not as a disorderly crowd, but as a formidable, silent formation. At Serena's signal, they threw off the cloaks covering their armor, and the desert was lit up with the ominous glint of steel and gold. At that moment, huge drums placed around the battlefield began to thunder. Their low, vibrating hum, mixed with the ringing of bells, created a terrifying cacophony that weighed on the minds of the Romans, causing their hearts to beat in rhythm with fear. The first blow was struck by mounted archers, who began to circle around the Roman square, raising clouds of sand. The legionaries closed their shields, hoping to wait out the barrage, as they had done hundreds of times before. But when the first arrow struck the formation, the Romans realized with horror that their equipment was useless. The heavy Parthian arrows pierced through the scutums, pinning the soldiers' hands to their shields, piercing their armor, and embedding themselves in their bodies. This was not just a barrage, it was an execution of stationary targets. The Romans tried to make sorties, sending light infantry and velites forward, but they were instantly destroyed by a hail of arrows before they could even get close to the enemy. The legionaries were forced to stand and endure, clutching their pilums, which were useless against a distant enemy. The cries of the wounded, the neighing of horses, and the monotonous rumble of drums merged into a symphony of hell. The dust raised by the hooves of the Parthian horses enveloped the battlefield in a thick veil, in which it was barely possible to distinguish the figures of the enemies. The Romans stood shoulder to shoulder, feeling their comrades fall, but unable to strike back. The heat intensified, the water ran out, and arrows continued to fall from the sky like an endless iron rain. Crassus, watching from the center of the square, still hoped that the Parthians would soon run out of ammunition. He encouraged his soldiers, saying that they only needed to hold out a little longer. But then he saw something that made his blood run cold. Lines of camels approaching the archers with new bundles of arrows. Any hope that the barrage would stop on its own was dashed. At that moment, it became clear that passive defense would lead to the inevitable destruction of the entire army. The Roman formation, that monolith of discipline, began to crack under the relentless pressure. Soldiers huddled together, trying to take cover behind the bodies of the dead, their fear turning to despair. The Parthian cataphracts with their long spears stood at a distance, ready to strike any breach that appeared in the Roman formation. They were the hammer that was to break the anvil heated by the fire of arrows. The situation demanded immediate and decisive action. Otherwise, the army would be destroyed from a distance. Crassus realized that he had to force the enemy into close combat at any cost, or at least drive away the archers. He made the difficult decision to send his son, Publius, with a select detachment to attack. It was a gesture of desperation, an attempt to turn the tide of a battle that was already half lost. The Romans, accustomed to being in control, found themselves helpless victims. The enemy's technological and tactical advantage was overwhelming. What would you have done in the commander's place when the usual methods of defense ceased to work? Publius Crassus, son of the great commander, was a young officer whose sword had already been tempered by the experience of the Gallic campaign under Caesar himself. He was eager to prove himself worthy of the Crassus name, and when his father ordered him to break through the siege, Publius saw it not just as a task, but as a chance to write his own line in history. He assembled a strike force, 1,000 elite Gallic horsemen in iron helmets with colorful crests, 500 experienced archers, Cretans, Syrians, and Thracians, and 8 cohorts of heavy infantry, the most reliable and disciplined units in the army. This detachment, gleaming with bronze and steel under the blazing sun, broke out of the Roman square like a wedge and rushed at the Parthians, seeking to engage them in hand-to-hand combat, the only battle in which the Romans had a chance. But the Parthians, masters of non-contact warfare, did not succumb to temptation. Their mounted archers, like a flock of birds of prey, turned their horses and broke into a feigned retreat. The light cavalry raised clouds of golden dust, scattering across the plain like a swarm of arrows. Publius, confident that the enemy had faltered, felt the heat of victory in his chest and, forgetting caution, gave full chase. The Gallic horsemen, eager for battle, drove their horses forward, the infantry running behind, their lungs aching from the effort. It seemed that the Parthians were ready to be crushed. But as soon as the Romans withdrew, the desert itself seemed to change its face. The fleeing Parthians stopped as if on an invisible command, gracefully turned their horses around, and in the same second opened the way for fresh forces that had been hidden until then. From behind the ridges of the dunes, cataphracts poured out like an avalanche. Heavy cavalry in scaly armor, glistening in the sun like fish scales. Their spears were longer than the Roman ones, their horses more massive, trained to crush formations with the relentlessness of a wall. At the same time, mounted archers closed the ring around Publius's detachment, turning the Romans into targets in their own cloud of dust. The Gallic horsemen, despite their light armor, met the attack like beasts cornered. They jumped on the cataphracts, grabbed the shafts of their spears with their hands, tried to pull their enemies from their saddles, and chopped at the faces of the heavy horses and the joints of their armor with knives and axes. They fought with the mad desperation of men who know there is no way back. But the steel of their swords barely scratched the armor of the cataphracts, and the hail of arrows raining down from all sides turned every movement into a step toward death. Publius, already wounded, gathered the remnants of his shattered squad and led them to the nearest sandy hill, a pitiful patch of high ground that could give them at least some tactical advantage. They took it and built a circular defense, but this heroic stand turned out to be a deadly trap. As soon as the Romans climbed the hill, the archers turned it into a giant target. Arrows rained down from above, piercing shields, finding gaps between straps, and sinking into flesh. Soldiers fell, rolling down the slope, and the sand beneath their bodies turned dark, almost black. Publius saw his strength waning, saw the brave Gauls falling to their knees one by one, saw the Roman shields turning into a sea of arrows. He realized that there was no turning back, that he had led his men into the jaws of death, and that capture would mean dishonor, torture, and shame that would outlive his name. Then he ordered his squire, a young man who had followed him from Gaul, to stab him, and the squire, weeping, obeyed the order. Many officers, inspired by Publius' example, did the same, choosing death by their own swords rather than a shameful fate. The remaining soldiers held out as long as they could wield their weapons, but their fate was sealed. Almost the entire detachment, several thousand men, disappeared in the sands of Carrhae. Only a few survived, and their stories later spread throughout the East as legends of heroism and recklessness. The Parthians, having finished the battle, found Publius' body. They cut off his head, impaled it on a spear, and shouting with triumph, rushed back to the Roman camp. For them, it was a trophy equal to victory over the army. Meanwhile, the main Roman forces, exhausted, got a short break while the Parthians tore Publius's detachment to pieces. Crassus, unaware of the terrible truth, was reorganizing his troops on the hill, looking anxiously in the direction where his son had gone. He believed that Publius would appear, that he would cut through the enemy and return, as always, unscathed and victorious. But his faith was fading with each passing hour. And then the Parthians reappeared, bringing with them a horror that no Roman had expected. The sight of Publius' head on a spear was a blow to the army comparable to a bolt of lightning. It was not just the loss of a man, it was the breaking of morale, a symbol of the death of hope. This chapter of the battle showed all the cruelty and skill of Parthian tactics. Lure, divide, destroy in parts, without risk, without unnecessary proximity. Publius's sacrifice did not change the outcome. It only delayed the end, a cruel, inevitable, and desperate end that soon engulfed the remnants of Crassus' Roman army. Are you ready for the shocking truth? The most terrifying moment of the battle did not come during the clash of swords, but when the Parthians rode up to the Roman ranks and showed what they had brought with them. The head of Marcus Crassus, contorted in a grimace of pain, was held aloft on the tip of a spear in front of the ranks of legionaries. The Parthians mockingly asked whose son it was, since the cowardly Crassus could not have fathered such a brave warrior. This sight had the effect of an exploding bomb. Instead of a thirst for revenge, which could have given them strength, the Romans were overcome with chilling horror and apathy. Marcus Licinius Crassus himself, seeing the head of his beloved son, broke down. He tried to address the soldiers, saying that this was a loss only for a father, not for Rome. But his voice trembled, and his words fell on deaf ears. The battle continued until sunset, but it was already a beating of demoralized men. With the onset of darkness, the Parthians, who never fought at night, retreated, leaving the Romans alone with their dead and moaning wounded. The camp was plunged into mournful silence, broken only by cries and pleas for water. The military council gathered without their commander. Crassus lay on the ground, wrapped in his cloak, crushed by grief and the realization of the catastrophe. The officers, realizing that staying where they were meant certain death in the morning, decided on an immediate night retreat to the city of Carrhae. It was a desperate decision that required a terrible sacrifice. To leave secretly, they had to move quickly and quietly. This meant that all the seriously wounded, all those who could not walk on their own, would have to be left behind. When the soldiers began to gather, the wounded realized that they were being left at the mercy of the enemy. The camp was filled with cries of supplication, curses, and attempts to crawl after their departing comrades. It was one of the most shameful and tragic scenes in Roman history. The legionnaires, always renowned for their brotherhood, were forced to push away the hands of their friends, clinging to their clothes. They walked away into the darkness, covering their ears so as not to hear the cries of those with whom they had shared bread and water. The retreat turned into chaos. In the darkness, the troops lost each other, strayed from the path, and panicked at every rustle. The discipline that held the legion together crumbled to dust. The Romans fled, driven by fear, leaving behind their honor and pride. In the morning, the Parthians entered the abandoned Roman camp. They killed 4,000 wounded soldiers, methodically finishing off those who were still alive. Then they rushed in pursuit of the retreating army, knowing that their prey could not escape. That night broke the Roman army's spirit, not physically, but morally. The men turned into hunted animals, thinking only of saving their own skins. The great Crassus became a pitiful old man, led by the crowd. Leaving the wounded behind became an eternal stain on the conscience of the survivors. Do you think such an act can be justified in a situation where the survival of the majority is at stake? The remnants of the Roman army, exhausted by a night march of many kilometers, thirst, fear, and sleeplessness, reached the walls of Carrhae, a modest city with ancient temples and low brick fortifications in a shaky column. The Romans walked with difficulty, many supporting each other by the arms, and the only emotion visible on the legionnaires' faces was desperate hope. Behind these walls, they would find water, food, respite, and at least some shelter from the merciless desert in the Parthian cavalry. But Carrhae, instead of salvation, turned out to be a trap. The city was too small, its granaries too empty, its wells insufficient for an army numbering tens of thousands. The walls, which seemed to offer protection, turned the city into a trap, where each day of the siege was a step towards destruction. The Parthians wasted no time in closing the ring around Carrhae. Their swift horse archers spread out across the plain, blocking all roads, while sentries ensured that no Roman messenger could break through. Shurin, cool-headed and calculating, did not even attempt to storm the city. He understood that hunger, panic, and heat would do half the work for him. He staged demonstrations in front of the walls, sometimes conducting false attacks, sometimes sending messengers with offers of merciful surrender. These offers sounded like mockery. The Romans knew that surrendering to the Parthians meant slavery or a painful death. Crassus, having recovered from the death of his son, already understood clearly. Staying in Carrhae meant waiting for the end. The only chance was to break through to the Armenian mountains, where King Artavasdes promised support. Under cover of night, the Romans had to secretly leave the city and head for the mountains. far away, across the desert, but it was at least some kind of route. However, this required a guide. The city elders pointed to a man named Andromachus, a local resident who claimed to know safe paths. And once again, fate, as if mocking them, struck the Romans in their weakest spot. Andromachus turned out to be a traitor, bribed by the Parthians. He led the Roman column not to safety, but deeper and deeper into dark swamps and sticky ravines, where the legionnaires sank knee-deep, where mules fell, where the sky was covered with fog. He assured them that he was leading them on a detour, a hidden path, but in fact, every word he said was a lie. Stumbling in pitch darkness, the Romans lost their formation, abandoned their carts, and fell, exhausted. It was all part of the plan, to wear them down completely so that in the morning, the Parthians could finish them off without effort. When the first rays of the sun pierced the desert mist, the Romans realized with horror that they were not at the foot of the saving mountains, but on an open, flat plain with no cover. The Parthians were already approaching, disciplined, fresh, tireless. Exhaustion, fear, and chaos caused Crassus's army to split into two parts. Some of the troops under Octavius' command managed to retreat to a nearby fortified hill, while Crassus himself and the bulk of his army found themselves in the lowlands, at the mercy of fate. The Parthians descended on Crassus's group. Dust rose to the sky, arrows rained down like autumn rain. The Roman formation faltered, and it seemed that in a few minutes it would all be over. But suddenly a miracle happened. Octavian's soldiers, standing in relative safety on the hill, saw that their commander was dying, and they, breaking all the rules of tactics and all instincts of survival, descended. They marched in tight formation, with their shields raised like a moving wall, and bursting into the very center of the battle, surrounded Crassus with a living ring. Their cry was not a battle cry, it was almost a prayer. He will not fall while we are alive. This act, reminiscent of the Roman valor of old legends, confused even the Parthians. Serena realized that storming the hill, where two combined Roman units had now gathered, could result in heavy losses. The Romans fought like wounded wolves driven into a corner. The outcome of the battle became uncertain, and Serena decided to change his approach. He raised his hand and the archers ceased fire. A heavy, sticky silence fell. Serena rode forward on a horse decorated with armor and announced loudly that the Parthian king was merciful. He was ready to let the Romans go home if Crassus agreed to negotiate and sign a peace treaty. It sounded too good to be true, but the exhausted, wounded, dehydrated soldiers heard in these words not a threat, but a chance for salvation. They began to shout, demand, beg Crassus to agree, threatening mutiny if he refused. Crassus found himself in a situation more frightening than any battle. The army he was supposed to lead was pushing him into the arms of the enemy. He became a prisoner of his own soldiers, soldiers driven to despair. Information worth millions of lives is often hidden behind the polite smiles of diplomats. Serena proposed a meeting in neutral territory to sign a treaty of retreat. Crassus, who did not trust the Parthians for a second, tried to refuse, but his own soldiers, banging their weapons on their shields, shouted that it was unworthy of a commander who had sent them to their deaths to be afraid of meeting the enemy himself. Broken and depressed, Crassus descended the hill accompanied by a small group of officers and lictors. The Parthians greeted them with ostentatious honor. Serena, seeing that Crassus was walking, exclaimed, "It is unseemly for a Roman emperor to walk," and ordered a richly decorated horse to be brought to him. As soon as Crassus was seated in the saddle, the Parthian grooms began to whip the horse, trying to carry the commander toward the Parthian ranks. The Roman officers, sensing something was wrong, tried to stop the horse. A scuffle ensued, which escalated into a short and violent battle. In the commotion, Octavius drew his sword and killed one of the Parthian grooms, but was immediately struck down himself by a blow to the back. A massacre ensued. Crassus's guards were killed in a matter of seconds. Marcus Licinius. Crassus himself was killed in the melee, either by a Parthian soldier named Exatrus or by someone else in the general confusion. His head and right arm were cut off. The body of the richest man in Rome was left lying in the dust, trampled by horses, no different from the bodies of ordinary legionaries. Thus ended the inglorious life of the man who wanted to buy himself glory. There is a famous legend that the Parthians poured molten gold into the throat of Crassus's dead head, saying, "You thirsted for gold, so drink it." Historically, this may be a myth or a theatrical performance staged later at the court of the Parthian king. But as a symbol, this action perfectly describes the essence of what happened. Crassus' head was indeed sent to King Orodes II, who was celebrating his son's wedding to the sister of the Armenian king at the time. According to legend, the head was thrown into the center of the banquet hall during a performance of Euripides' tragedy, The Bacchae, where it played the role of Pentheus' head. The remnants of the Roman army, deprived of their command, turned into a mob. Some surrendered, while others tried to flee to the mountains and were captured by local tribes. Of the 40,000 men who crossed the Euphrates, only a pitiful handful returned to Syria. The death of Crassus was not just the death of a man, it was the end of the triumvirate era. The balance of power in Rome collapsed. Now there were only two predators left in the arena, Caesar and Pompey, and there was no longer a buffer between them. The Parthians won the greatest victory in their history, proving that Rome was not all-powerful. The Roman eagles, the sacred standards of the legions, fell into the hands of the enemy, which was an indelible disgrace for the entire empire. After the defeat at Carrhae, the fate of the few surviving Romans was tragic and strikingly different. But for the vast majority, the outcome was the same: slavery, loss of homeland, and endless service in foreign lands. About 10,000 legionaries were taken prisoner by the Parthians. These were emaciated, sunburned, exhausted men who only yesterday had stood shoulder to shoulder in the seemingly invincible Roman formations. The Parthians, impressed by the discipline and military skill of the Romans, did not destroy them. On the contrary, they saw the prisoners as a tool that could be used. Instead of executing them, they sent them on a long, painful journey to the opposite end of the Parthian Empire, to the distant oasis of Merv, located on the eastern border of the empire, where the sands gave way to steppes and where the raids of the nomadic Huns began. There, in the harsh climate of Central Asia, amid desert winds, scorching sun, and foreign languages, the Roman captives were destined to spend the rest of their lives. They were put to work as border guards, a living barrier between Parthia and the steppe tribes. Legionnaires who had grown up under the mild Mediterranean sky found themselves at the edge of the world they knew, in a place that seemed like a figure from a myth, a point where the earth ends and nothingness begins. Years passed. No news of them reached Rome or the Syrian provinces. For their homeland, they were dead, and the memory of them faded into the annals of history like a ship lost in a storm. But history holds mysteries, and one of them is still hotly debated by scholars. 17 years after the disaster at Carrhae in 36 BC, Chinese chronicles of the Han Dynasty describe a strange encounter near the city of Talas. The Chinese were fighting against the Huns and saw an unusual infantry unit on their side. Men who fought in a formation resembling fish scales. The description strikingly coincides with the Roman tortoise formation, where shields are joined together above the heads and sides, turning the unit into an armored fortress. These warriors, as stated in the chronicles, defended a fortified place surrounded by a double palisade of pine logs, a structure clearly foreign to the local peoples of Central Asia, but quite typical of Roman camps and temporary fortifications. The Chinese, having won, took more than 100 of these mysterious fighters prisoner and resettled them in a county called Lycian. According to a number of researchers, the word Lycian itself is consonant with the ancient Chinese name for Rome or legion. This coincidence already hints at an incredible story. Modern genetic studies of the inhabitants of the village of Lycian have revealed unusual European features among their descendants: light eyes, red or blonde hair, high noses, and above-average height for the region. These traits seem to echo a distant, almost forgotten civilization carried here by the winds of history. Perhaps it was here, in the mountains of modern China, that the Roman legionnaires found their final resting place, the very ones whom Crassus abandoned to their doom in the dead sands of Mesopotamia. They traveled thousands of kilometers, served foreign kings, built foreign fortifications, but perhaps retained their fighting skills and memories of a homeland they would never see again. The theory of the Lost Legion remains controversial, but it weaves an amazing, almost mystical hue into the tragedy at Carrhae. It turns nameless prisoners into epic heroes who crossed Eurasia, leaving a mark where no one expected to find it. While their commander died ingloriously, the fate of the ordinary soldiers turned out to be longer and far more remarkable. Meanwhile, in Rome itself, the return of the standard, the sacred eagle of the legion, became a matter of imperial honor. Only 30 years later, Emperor Octavian Augustus, without resorting to war, but using only diplomacy and pressure, managed to return the eagles. This moment was celebrated as the greatest victory, although not a single battle was won for it. The story of these captured legionaries reminds us that the echoes of a great defeat can reverberate for centuries. People lost to their country could write their names in the history of a foreign land, quietly, unnoticed, but forever. The consequences of the defeat at Carrhae for Rome were catastrophic and went far beyond military losses. The death of Crassus destroyed the fragile political balance on which the first triumvirate was based. Crassus was the third force that restrained the ambitions of Pompey and Caesar, preventing them from going for each other's throats. With his disappearance, the path to civil war was open. Pompey, who remained in Rome, grew closer to the Senate, seeing Caesar as a threat to his power. Caesar, who had conquered Gaul, had no intention of giving up his command and becoming a private citizen vulnerable to prosecution. A chasm formed between the two giants, which had previously been filled by Crassus' gold. Just 4 years after Carrhae, Caesar would cross the Rubicon, and Rome would plunge into a bloody civil war that would bury the Republic and give birth to the empire. It can be said that the sands of Carrhae became the soil on which Caesar's dictatorship grew. In geopolitical terms, the defeat halted Rome's expansion to the east for centuries. Parthia established itself as an equal superpower, Rome's only real rival. The euphoria of the legion's invincibility disappeared. The Romans realized that the world was bigger than they thought, and that there were forces capable of repelling them. Fear of Parthian archers became firmly entrenched in the Roman consciousness. The expression Parthian arrow became a byword for a well-aimed parting shot. Rome was forced to rethink its military tactics, beginning to pay more attention to cavalry and archers in order to counter the eastern threat. The psychological trauma from the loss of the legion's standards, the sacred eagles, was profound. It was a humiliation that burned the pride of every Roman. Generations of diplomats and commanders would strive to erase this stain of shame. The Carthaginians became a cruel lesson that money cannot buy military success, and that a leader's personal ambitions can cost the lives of thousands and the fate of an entire state. Crassus sought glory, but found only an eternal example of how not to wage war. The story of this battle is a warning that underestimating your enemy and ignoring reality for the sake of a beautiful dream always leads to disaster. The greatest empire in the world stumbled over its own pride. The Battle of Carrhae is not just an episode in ancient history. It is an eternal drama about greed, power, and retribution. We saw how one of the most powerful men of his time lost everything: his son, his army, his life, and his reputation in pursuit of the phantom of glory. The sands of Mesopotamia swallowed the Roman legions, but they could not hide the truth about what led to this tragedy. History teaches us that even the greatest empires are vulnerable when they are led not by wisdom, but by vanity. What part of this tragic story struck you the most? The cunning of the Parthian tactics, or the fate of the lost legion in China? Suggest topics for future videos in the comments. What other forgotten disasters of antiquity would you like to learn about? And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new journeys into the past.